6:19 p.m. The Bohemian Forest is swallowing the light. Jonas Keller and his son Milo are racing home before the fog turns lethal and the temperature drops below the point of survival. Suddenly, a trembling cry echoes. Jonas finds a woman huddled in the dirt, her clothes torn, eyes wide with terror. He carries her through the freezing wind to the safety of their cabin. Hours later, Jonas turns on the TV. Red letters crawl across the screen. Billionaire CEO missing. National search underway. Jonas freezes. The face on the screen is the woman in his guest room. Jonas Keller was a man shaped by cedar and silence. At 42, his hands were calloused from years of working as a local carpenter, and his heart was shielded by the responsibility of raising his 9-year-old son, Milo. They lived in a modest timber house at the edge of the Bohemian Forest, a place that provided Jonas with peace, but also served as a constant reminder of what he had lost. 4 years ago, the forest had taken his wife, Clara. She was an experienced climber who fell during a sudden storm. Since that day, Jonas respected the woods, but he never truly loved them again. He stayed on the marked trails. He watched the clouds. He taught Milo that the forest wasn't a playground. It was a living thing that demanded respect. Jonas's daily routine was a clockwork of survival and fatherhood. He would wake up at 5:00 a.m., the smell of sawdust still clinging to his skin from the day before, to prepare Milo's breakfast. He didn't want a grand life. He wanted a safe one. To the locals in the nearby village, Jonas was a ghost, a man who did excellent work with wood, but rarely spoke more than 10 words at a time. He preferred the company of trees. Trees didn't ask personal questions, and they didn't offer pity for a widower. "If someone's lost, Milo," Jonas would say while teaching the boy to sharpen a knife, his voice steady like the hum of a saw. "You don't ask who they are. You don't ask why they're there. You just bring them home. That is the law of the mountain. The woods don't recognize titles, and neither do we." Jonas had once been more than a carpenter. Before Clara's death, he was an expert in high-altitude search and rescue. He had pulled men from crevasses and navigated blizzards that would swallow cities. But after the mountain took the woman he loved, he buried that part of himself. He traded his climbing ropes for wood planes, thinking he could hide from the danger of caring for a stranger. But the forest, it seemed, had other plans. On this particular evening, the air felt different. It was heavy, laden with a moisture that bit through even the thickest wool. Milo, with his mother's adventurous eyes, had spotted a rare species of owl earlier that afternoon and begged to follow it deeper toward the ridge. Jonas had hesitated, his internal barometer screaming of a shift in the wind, but he relented for just 10 more minutes. As they walked, Jonas noticed the small details that others might miss. The way the ants were frantically sealing their mounds and how the deer were moving toward the lower valleys. The Bohemian Forest was preparing to lock down. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that usually precedes something shattering. "Stay close, Milo," Jonas commanded. He reached into his pocket and handed the boy a small, silver survival whistle. "The fog hides the markers. If we get separated or if I don't answer when you call, blow this. 3 short bursts. Never stop until I find you. Do you hear me?" "I hear you, Dad," Milo said, clutching the whistle like a talisman. They were heading back, only 10 minutes from the warmth of their cabin, when the sound reached them. It wasn't a bird or a branch snapping under the weight of a deer. It was a human gasp, a jagged, desperate sound followed by a sob that sounded like it was being squeezed out of a pair of collapsing lungs. Jonas stopped. He looked at the safe path, then at the dark thicket of thorns off the trail. He found her huddled in a hollow of roots. When he lifted her, she was so cold she felt like carved ice. Her silk blouse, once a symbol of immense wealth, was now a useless rag. He could feel her heart hammering against his back as he carried her, a frantic, rhythmic plea for life. In that moment, she wasn't a billionaire. She was a shivering soul whose survival depended entirely on the strength of a stranger's legs. As they neared the cabin, Jonas pushed himself harder, his lungs burning. He knew the signs of stage 2 hypothermia. The woman was drifting, her grip on his shoulders loosening. "Stay with me," he barked, more as a command than a comfort. "Look at the light in the window. That's home. We're almost home." Inside the cabin, the fireplace crackled. fighting back the chill that Eva had brought in with her. Jonas worked with a quiet efficiency, removing her wet shoes and wrapping her feet in heated towels. Eva sat paralyzed, staring into the flames as if searching for a forgotten version of herself. "You're safe now," Jonas said, his voice low and grounding. "The walls are thick, and the storm can't get in." Eva looked at him, her eyes finally focusing. "You don't understand. The storm isn't just outside." She watched as Milo brought her a bowl of soup, his small face etched with a concern that was far too old for a 9-year-old. When he offered her Clara's lavender scarf, the scent hit her like a memory of a childhood she barely remembered. In the high-stakes world of energy conglomerates and hostile takeovers, softness was considered a lethal weakness. Here, in this tiny wooden house, it was the only thing keeping her from shattering. "Why do you live all the way out here?" she asked, her voice still a fragile rasp. "Because out here the wood tells the truth," Jonas replied, stirring the embers. "If you build something wrong, it breaks. If you treat the forest with disrespect, you get lost. It's predictable. People are much harder to read. They have layers of varnish. Sometimes you don't know what's underneath until you sand it all away." Eva spent the next hour watching them. She saw how Jonas didn't use a television or a tablet to distract his son. Instead, they sat at the table and carved small wooden animals together. She saw a father who was entirely present, a man who didn't check a watch or an inbox every 30 seconds. "I spend my life fighting people who want my chair, my name, my shares," she whispered to the empty air, though Jonas heard her. "I forgot that people just exist without needing anything in return. My father taught me that every handshake is a contract. Every smile is a negotiation. I haven't seen an honest face in 15 years." As the soup warmed her from the inside, she began to divulge more about the vultures. She spoke of a meeting in a mountain lodge that had turned into a nightmare. Her own driver, a man she had trusted for a decade, had taken a wrong turn on purpose, a shortcut that led into a trap. She had jumped from the car while it was still moving, tumbling into the ravine and losing herself in the pines. She had spent 5 hours wandering in circles, her expensive life flashing before her eyes as the frost began to numb her fingers. "I thought about my legacy," she said, her voice bitter. "I realized my legacy was just a list of numbers on a spreadsheet. No one was going to remember how I felt about the rain or how I liked my coffee. They were just going to remember my stock price. If I had died out there, the board would have replaced me before the funeral was over." Jonas looked at her, truly looked at her. "Then maybe the forest didn't just make you lost. Maybe it gave you a chance to be found, not by a rescue team, but by yourself." As the night deepened, Eva's fear transformed into a strange kind of curiosity. She asked Jonas about Clara. She asked about the wood he used for his furniture. For a few hours, the billionaire CEO was just a woman trying to understand a world where time wasn't money, but life. "Clara loved the height," Jonas said, his voice softening. "She said the higher you go, the closer you get to the truth. I think I finally understand what she meant. Down in the valley, there's too much noise. Up here, there's just the wind. It's cleaner." By 9:12 p.m., the silence of the cabin was absolute, save for the rhythmic breathing of a sleeping Milo. Jonas finally sat down and turned on the small TV, hoping for news of the road closures. Instead, he saw the face of the woman sitting 10 feet away from him, captioned by the word "missing" in blood-red text. The screen showed her in a power suit, standing in front of a skyscraper, the starkest contrast possible to the woman wrapped in his wife's lavender scarf. "Echoes in the timber," uttered 450 words anew. The blizzard outside began to howl, a mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through the very logs of the cabin. For Jonas, it was a familiar song, but for Eva, it sounded like the world was tearing itself apart. She watched Jonas as he meticulously checked the window seals, his movements fluid and purposeful. "You move like the forest doesn't scare you," she remarked, clutching the warm mug of herbal tea. "Fear is just information, Eva," Jonas replied without looking back. "It tells you where the edge is. If you don't feel it, you're dangerous to yourself. But if you let it steer, you're already dead." He sat down across from her, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows on his weathered face. For the first time, Eva noticed the small, jagged scar running through his eyebrow, a relic of a rescue mission that had gone sideways years ago. "In my world," Eva said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "the edge is everywhere. Every contract has a trap. Every partner has a price. I thought I was the one building the towers, but I was just building a more expensive cage." She reached out and touched the grain of the heavy oak table Jonas had built. This is solid. It doesn't lie. Why did you stop being a rescuer, Jonas? You're too good at it to just be a carpenter." Jonas's jaw tightened. The silence stretched until only the crackle of the hearth remained. "Because I couldn't save the only person who mattered," he finally said. "I knew the mountain better than anyone. I knew the signs. And yet I let her go up that day because I didn't want to be the one to tell her no. I thought my love was a safety net. It wasn't." He looked at Eva, and for a moment, the billionaire and the carpenter shared a grief that was identical. "I realized that sometimes the hardest person to rescue is the one you see in the mirror every morning." Eva felt a strange shift in her chest. For years, she had been surrounded by men who boasted of their conquests. Here was a man who spoke only of his failures, and yet he seemed more whole than anyone she had ever known. "I came into these woods to disappear," Eva admitted, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. "I wanted the noise to stop. I didn't care if I woke up tomorrow." Jonas leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Well, you woke up, and the noise is still there, but now you have a choice. You can go back to the cage, or you can start building something that actually stands." The realization that he was protecting a woman worth billions changed the air in the room. It became electric, heavy with the threat of what was coming. Jonas knew that a woman of her stature didn't just disappear, she was hunted. Her disappearance would trigger a tectonic shift in the global markets. When the helicopter arrived, it didn't feel like a rescue. The searchlight was aggressive, stripping the privacy from his home, turning his sanctuary into a stage. Jonas saw the way Eva shrank into the corner, her eyes wide with a terror that no amount of money could soothe. "They won't stop until they find me," she whispered. "My disappearance is worth more than my life right now. There are billions of dollars in short positions betting on my company failing. If I don't show up to the board meeting tomorrow, those people become unimaginably rich." Jonas didn't hesitate. He wasn't thinking about the danger to himself. He was thinking about Milo. He ushered them into the root cellar, a hidden space beneath the floorboards that Clara had insisted on stocking with supplies years ago. "Do not breathe, Inishimanor," he told them. "Whatever you hear, stay down. Milo, keep the whistle in your hand. If you hear me call your name 3 times, you run through the back crawl space and don't stop until you hit the village." Jonas stepped onto the porch to face the men from the black SUV. They weren't soldiers, and they weren't police. They were mercenaries in expensive gear, men who lived in the gray areas between corporate law and outright crime. "We're looking for a package," the lead man said, his voice like grinding stones. He didn't look like a rescuer. He looked like a cleaner. "I only deal in timber," Jonas replied, his hand tightening on the iron pry bar. He stood in the doorway, blocking the view of the living room where Eva's muddy silk heels still sat by the fire. The standoff was a test of wills. The man tried to intimidate Jonas, offering him compensation for his cooperation. When that didn't work, the tone turned lethal. Jonas used every trick he knew, the survival whistle to confuse their ears, the wood stack to create a diversion, and his intimate knowledge of the shadows to make himself seem like a dozen men. He knew the cabin like it was part of his own body. He slipped into the dark workshop, moving through the sawdust like a ghost. He tripped their sensors with falling branches and used the wind to carry his footsteps away from them. He knew where the ground was soft and where the old bear traps from a century ago were hidden. One of the men screamed as his foot disappeared into a hidden sinkhole Jonas had marked with a specific arrangement of stones. But the men were relentless. One of them found the cellar door. Jonas felt a surge of cold fury he hadn't felt since the day the rescuers told him Clara was gone. He didn't use a gun, he used a heavy timber clamp. In the pitch black of the hallway, he was the apex predator. He didn't just fight for a billionaire. He fought for the sanctity of his home and the safety of his son. When the authorities finally swarmed the clearing, led by Eva's trusted government contact, the mercenaries were caught in a pincer movement. Jonas stood at the edge of the woods, watching as the vultures were cuffed and led away. He didn't step into the light. He stayed in the shadows, waiting for the circus to leave his yard. He saw Eva being escorted to a medical tent, her eyes searching the trees for him. He didn't go to her. He went to the cellar to get his son. In the days that followed, the world went mad. The media painted a picture of a heroic mountain man, but Jonas made sure that man remained a myth. He refused the cameras. He refused the interviews. He wanted his son to grow up in a world where doing the right thing was normal, not a headline. When he finally visited Eva in her glass and steel fortress, he felt out of place. The air was too thin, the lights too bright. The lobby was filled with marble and security guards who looked at his flannel shirt with disdain. "You can have anything, Jonas," Eva said, pushing a check across the table that contained more zeros than Jonas had ever seen. "A new house, a fleet of cars, a future for Milo that is paved in gold. I've even set up a trust that will cover his education and his children's education." Jonas looked at the check. He thought about the smell of pine in the morning. He thought about the way Milo looked when he successfully carved a wooden bird. He thought about the lavender scarf which Eva had kept. "If I take this," Jonas said quietly, "I lose the very thing that allowed me to save you. I lose the silence. I lose the truth. I don't want Milo to think that every person he helps is a winning lottery ticket. I want him to help people because they're people, not because they're important." He pushed it back. "I just want Milo to be safe. I want the men who hunted you to stay behind bars, and I want to go back to my workshop. That's my reward. My workshop is where I talk to Clara. I don't need gold to do that." Eva reached into her desk and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. It was filled with her handwriting, not about stocks or mergers, but about the forest, about the soup, about the lavender scarf. She told him that she had begun investigating her own board. She was cleaning house using the same ruthlessness she used to build the company to now protect the people she had ignored for years. "I'm stepping down," she whispered. "I'm giving it all to a trust. I can't go back to who I was before I fell into those woods. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fog, and I see you carrying me. I see a man who had nothing but his strength and his son, and yet you were more powerful than any CEO I've ever met." She handed Milo the silver whistle, a symbol of a bond that transcended social classes. "When you blow this, Milo, remember that someone is always listening. Somewhere, someone will always come to find you. Because your father taught me that nobody is ever truly lost if someone is willing to look for them. And sometimes getting lost is the only way to find out where you're supposed to be." The conversation turned to the vultures. Eva explained how they had been arrested for attempted kidnapping and corporate espionage. The scandal had rocked the financial world, but Jonas didn't care about the news. He only cared that the black SUVs would never come back to his trail. He felt a sense of closure, not for Eva, but for himself. He had finally rescued someone and brought them home. The boardroom reckoning, 450 words new. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and ego, situated on the 82nd floor. For 15 years, Eva had been its high priestess. But today she walked in with a different kind of authority, the kind that came from surviving a night in the dirt. Her chief operating officer, Marcus, sat at the head of the table, already acting as if the chair belonged to him. "Eva," he said, his voice dripping with feigned relief, "we were devastated. The markets have been volatile. We've prepared the transition papers for your signature. For your health, of course." Eva didn't sit. She stood at the window, looking out over the city that looked like a toy set from this height. "I spent 5 hours in a ravine, Marcus," she said, her voice calm and terrifying. "I had stage 2 hypothermia. I was a few minutes away from becoming a statistic. And do you know what I thought about?" The room went silent. "I didn't think about the merger. I didn't think about the quarterly dividends." She turned around, and for the first time, Marcus saw the steel in her eyes that hadn't been tempered by a boardroom, but by the Bohemian Forest. "I thought about how much money you and the board made by shorting our own stock while I was missing. I thought about the GPS logs from my car that show my driver taking a deliberate detour into the storm. She threw a leather-bound journal onto the table. This contains every offshore account you've used to funnel company funds into the kidnapping plot. I don't need a signature for a transition, Marcus. I need a confession. Marcus turned pale. You have no proof. That's just a diary. Actually, Eva smiled, a cold, sharp expression. It's a roadmap. The carpenter who saved me taught me something about wood. If you want to know if it's rotten, you don't look at the varnish. You look at the core. You're all rotten to the core. Within an hour, federal agents were in the building. As they were led away, Eva looked at the empty chair. She realized she didn't want it anymore. She walked to her office, took Clara's lavender scarf from her desk and walked out. She didn't take the elevator. She took the stairs, feeling every step, reclaiming her own legs. The months turned into seasons, and the story of the missing billionaire faded from the front pages, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies. In the Bohemian Forest, the only thing that mattered was the arrival of the first frost. Jonas continued his work, carving furniture that was sought after by collectors who didn't know his name, only the quality of his grain. He noticed that his supplies were being replenished in mysterious ways. Rare hardwoods would appear on his porch, and a scholarship for children of deceased search and rescue workers was established in the village, funded anonymously. Jonas knew the source, but he never spoke of it. Milo, now 10, began to spend his weekends at a small nature center that had opened nearby. The center was built on land that had once been slated for a resort development. It was now a sanctuary dedicated to teaching city children about the law of the mountain. The director of the center was a woman who rarely appeared in public, preferring the company of the owls and the foxes. One evening, Jonas received a letter. There was no return address, just a single pressed lavender petal inside. Jonas, the letter began, the board tried to sue the trust. They tried to claim I was mentally unfit because I gave away the tower. I told them that the only time I was unfit was when I thought I was more important than the wind. I'm happy now. I'm building something that doesn't have a stock price. Thank you for sanding away the varnish. Jonas smiled, the first true smile since Clara's passing. He realized that saving Eva hadn't just been about her life. It had been about reclaiming his own ability to connect with the world. He was no longer a ghost in the village. He was a father, a craftsman, and a keeper of the woods. He took Milo to the ridge, where they had first heard Eva's cry. They stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning gold. Dad, Milo asked, looking at his silver whistle, do you think she still hears it when I blow it? I think she hears it every time the wind blows through the pines, Jonas replied, because once you've been found, you never really forget the sound of the person who came for you. They began the walk back to the cabin. The path was clear, the markers were bright, and for the first time in 4 years, the Bohemian Forest didn't feel like a graveyard. It felt like a home. Voiceover. He didn't save a billionaire. He saved a human heart. And in return, the forest gave them both something that money could never buy, a path that finally led them home. Because in the end, we are all just travelers in the woods, looking for a light in the window. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Chip Healing Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.